You know, when we think about the collapse of, like, a massive, seemingly invincible political system, we usually picture this single cataclysmic event.
Right, like an earthquake or something.
Exactly, like an earthquake. The ground shakes, the marble columns shatter, and boom, it's just over in an afternoon.
Yeah, it's entirely human nature to look for that explosive moment. I mean, we really crave a clear, defining before and after in our historical narratives.
Like a cleaner.
Exactly. It makes the timeline neat and digestible.
Right.
You know, we want to point to one day on the calendar and say, well, that is when the world changed.
But history rarely operates on a neat calendar, does it?
No, not at all.
And for the Roman Republic, we've all been taught that the earthquake was the Ides of March, 44 BCE.
Right.
The story goes that Julius Caesar, he walks into the Senate, gets stabbed 23 times by this group of noble patriots, and the Republic just dies with him right there on the marble floor.
It's incredibly dramatic.
It really is. It's basically a Shakespearean cinematic climax. But, and this is why we're here, when you step away from the plays and dive into the actual historical record, that neat little timeline just completely falls apart.
Oh, it shatters completely. Because the uncomfortable truth about political systems is that democracies and republics, they don't usually die in a single afternoon.
Right.
The architecture of a state, it rots from the inside out.
Right.
Very slowly. Over generations, really. Long before the roof actually caves in.
So forget the romanticized heroes and, the mustache-twirling villains.
Mm-hmm.
Because today, we are going to completely challenge what you think you know about the assassination of Julius Caesar and the fall of Rome.
We really are.
Because to actually understand this collapse, we have to talk about, get this, lethal office furniture, 48% interest payday loans, a pearl necklace worth an unfathomable 6 million sesterces.
Which is just a crazy amount of money.
Insane. And perhaps most surprisingly, the women who quietly brokered the rise and fall of empires right from their dining rooms.
It's a completely different side of the history.
It really is. And to figure all this out, we're diving into this incredible stack of sources you've shared with us today. We're doing a deep dive into comprehensive encyclopedic breakdowns of the assassins, a brilliant textbook chapter on the Republic's fall, study guides that feature, like, actual architectural ruins of these events.
Those are fascinating to look at, by the way.
Oh, totally. And we've also got this really extensive historical essay on the underground power of Roman matriarchs.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is really to synthesize all of these incredibly detailed sources. We want to connect the dots between the very first drops of political blood spilled in 133 BCE and the total undeniable collapse of a 500-year-old republic.
So we're looking at the big picture.
Exactly. We are extracting the exact mechanics of how a state dismantles itself through a century of broken norms. And crucially, we're shining a massive spotlight on the women who operated the levers of power entirely behind the scenes.
Away from the male-dominated Senate floor.
Right, exactly.
And as we track this century-long collapse, we're going to see the rise of two really intense political factions in ancient Rome. You have the populares, who generally champion the common people and the urban poor, and the optimates, who ruthlessly protected the wealth and traditions of the conservative elite.
Right, the two big heavyweights.
Yeah. But just to be completely clear with you, as we pull from these sources today, we aren't picking sides here. We're not endorsing ancient conservative or populist agendas.
No, not at all.
We are impartially reporting the facts of the source material. We're just looking at the unvarnished mechanics of how these two factions managed to completely dismantle their own government.
Yeah, and to understand that dismantling, we really have to recognize that the beginning of the end doesn't feature, daggers in the dark.
No.
No. It features the legs of wooden benches.
Okay, wow. Benches.
Yeah. We have to rewind the clock a full century before Caesar's death. We're going to the year 133 BCE.
Setting the scene.
Right. Rome has essentially just finished conquering the Mediterranean. They defeated Carthage in the Punic Wars, they conquered Greece, and the wealth flowing into the capital is just unprecedented.
Like rivers of silver.
Exactly.
But the sources point out that this massive influx of wealth is actually the catalyst for the crisis.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Because this victory caused a massive socioeconomic unbalancing. You have all this new silver, thousands upon thousands of newly enslaved people pouring in from these conquered territories and these vast tracts of newly acquired public land.
Right.
So the fundamental question tearing Roman society apart became, well, who actually gets to benefit from all this?
And this historical answer was, predictably, the ultra-wealthy elite.
Naturally.
Yeah. The socioeconomic mechanics here are really crucial to understand. In Rome, there was something called ager publicus, which just means public land owned by the state.
Okay.
And by law, there were strict limits on how much of this public land any one citizen could lease or use.
It's unfair.
It was. But the wealthy senatorial class they started ignoring the laws completely.
Of course they did.
Right. They bought up or forcefully seized massive tracts of this land, creating these enormous mega farms called latifundia. And rather than hiring poor Roman citizens to work these farms, they staffed them entirely with the cheap, newly acquired enslaved labor from their conquests.
Wow. Which creates a devastating domino effect for the average Roman citizen. Right?
Massive.
Because the small family farmers simply cannot compete with these huge slave-run mega farms. They go bankrupt, their land is swallowed up by the wealthy elite, and these newly landless, destitute Romans are forced to migrate into the city of Rome.
Forming a massive, desperate urban underclass.
Exactly. And this is where we meet our first major figure, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus.
Tiberius Gracchus, yes.
He is from one of the oldest, most respected patrician families in Rome. But in 133 BCE, he gets elected as a plebeian tribune.
Which is a magistrate meant to protect the rights of the common people.
Right. And he looks at this systemic inequality and realizes it's just a ticking time bomb.
It was. But we have to look closely at why Tiberius viewed it as a time bomb. Because, according to our sources, his primary motivation wasn't, necessarily purely altruistic social justice.
Really?
No, it was actually a severe national security crisis.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the mechanics of the Roman military at this time dictated that only men who owned property could serve in the legions. You had to have enough wealth to buy your own armor and weapons.
Ah, okay. So if everyone is losing their land.
Exactly. As the wealthy elite systematically pushed the common citizens off their land, the pool of eligible military recruits absolutely plummets.
Oh, wow.
Rome is expanding its empire, but it literally cannot find enough qualified men to fight its wars.
That is a huge problem. So Tiberius proposes a wildly controversial law, the Lex Sempronia Agraria. And the mechanics of this law are actually fairly straightforward, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are.
He essentially says, look, we are going to strictly enforce the old laws that are already on the books. We are going to confiscate all that illegally hoarded public land from the mega rich, chop it up into small manageable plots, and redistribute it to the poor landless Romans.
Right.
By doing this, he solves the poverty crisis and instantly repopulates the military recruitment pool. I mean, it sounds like a highly practical, pragmatic solution to a massive state problem.
It was incredibly practical, but it threatened the bottom line of the Optimates, that conservative elite faction.
Because it's their money.
Exactly, because they had been treating this public land as their own private inheritance for generations. I mean, they had built villas on it, invested in it, buried their ancestors in it.
Wow, so they felt it was theirs.
Yeah. So when Tiberius proposes giving it back to the public, they are apoplectic.
Right.
And the Optimates control the Senate. Tiberius knows the Senate will never pass this law.
So he just goes around them.
Yes. He utilizes a legal maneuver to bypass them entirely. He takes his law directly to the plebeian council of People's Assembly, and they overwhelmingly vote to pass it.
Which, I mean, this bypassing of the Senate is really the first major crack in the foundation of the Republic's norms.
Absolutely.
The Senate is furious that their authority is being circumvented like this. So fast forward to an election assembly later that year, Tiberius is trying to run for an unprecedented second consecutive term as tribune.
Which is legally murky territory, very murky.
Right. So the Senate holds this emergency meeting in the nearby temple of Fidus. And during this meeting, the Pontifex Maximus, who astonishingly happens to be Tiberius's own cousin, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica, he stands up and passionately argues that Tiberius is a tyrant trying to make himself a king.
Yeah, he says the consuls must use force to stop him.
But the consuls refuse to act without a trial.
Exactly. They won't do it. Nasica's incensed. He basically declares that if the consuls will not save the Republic, he will do it himself. Yeah. He wraps the fold of his toga over his head, which is this religious gesture indicating he is performing a sacrifice, and he leads a mob of enraged, wealthy senators out of the temple and directly into the public assembly where Tiberius is speaking.
And here is where the mechanics of Roman law create this viscerally horrifying scene. Because by law, No iron weapons are allowed inside the sacred boundaries of the city for political debates.
Right, no swords in the city.
You simply cannot bring a sword to a legislative assembly. So these lawmakers, these highly educated, immensely wealthy senators in their pristine white togas, literally start ripping apart the wooden benches and chairs used for the assembly.
It's just wild.
They grab the splintered wooden legs, storm through the crowd, and club Tiberius Gracchus to death right there in the street.
Yeah.
They beat him to death with office furniture, and then they dump his body, along with hundreds of his supporters, straight into the Tiber River.
It is a chilling, paradigm-shifting moment in Roman history. The ultimate political taboo is broken. The sanctity of the tribune's body, which was supposed to be untouchable by law, was violently violated by the highest officials in the state.
It's unbelievable.
And the tragedy is that the violence doesn't stop there. Exactly 10 years later, in 123 BCE, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, gets elected to the exact same office of tribune.
Round two.
Yeah, and Gaius is even more ambitious. He tries to push the reforms further, attempting to stabilize grain prices and proposing full Roman citizenship for Rome's Italian allies.
But this time, the Senate has learned how to formalize their violence. They don't just grab furniture anymore. They invent a brand new legal fiction to justify political murder.
Yes, they do.
Our sources detail a mechanism called the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the ultimate decree of the Senate.
And this decree is vital to understanding the fall of the Republic. The Senatus Consultum Ultimum was basically a declaration of martial law.
Okay.
It instructed the consuls to take whatever actions they deemed necessary to, quote, safeguard the state.
That sounds dangerous.
It was incredibly dangerous because the sinister mechanism behind it was that it implicitly suspended the foundational right of every Roman citizen, the right of provocatio, or the right to appeal a death sentence to the people.
Oh, wow. So no trial.
No trial. It essentially gave the consuls the power of judge, jury, and executioner without a trial.
That's terrifying.
Realizing that the Senate had just handed the consuls a state-sanctioned death warrant for him, Gaius Gracchus flees the city. He eventually commands his own enslaved servant to kill him before the Senate's mob can reach him.
I really want to pause and dwell on this because the imagery completely destroys our modern perception of ancient Rome.
Oh, it shatters it.
We tend to view the Roman Senate as this bastion of stoic philosophical debate, old men in togas giving speeches. But imagine a modern legislature today, lawmakers in expensive suits debating tax policy or zoning laws.
Right.
And suddenly the debate devolves into a literal lethal riot. They start tearing apart mahogany desks and beating their political rivals to death on the floor of the chamber.
It's completely barbaric.
It completely shatters the illusion of civilized debate. If the men making the laws are willing to use extreme extrajudicial violence to solve their political deadlocks, they are setting an incredibly dangerous precedent.
Exactly.
I mean, if the lawmakers use violence, what is going to stop the men with actual swords, the generals, from doing the exact same thing?
It normalizes political violence. The murders of the Gracchi brothers taught the Roman elite a very dark, very effective lesson. When the political system is gridlocked, lethal force works.
It gets the job done.
Exactly. It solves the immediate problem. But what the sources also reveal is that behind these two famously radical brothers was a woman who fundamentally changes our understanding of Roman power dynamics. We have to talk about their mother, Cornelia.
Oh, yes. Cornelia is an absolute force of nature in these sources.
She really is.
She is the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the legendary general who defeated Hannibal. She is practically Roman royalty, occupying the absolute pinnacle of aristocratic privilege. Her husband dies when she is still quite young, leaving her with young children. But instead of quietly fading into the background or being absorbed into another man's household, she takes total autonomous control of her family's future.
And she does so through intellectual dominance. She takes full control of her children's education, which was highly unusual for a woman at that time.
Really unusual.
Yeah. She hires the absolute best Greek tutors and philosophers of the age, men like Glaucius of Cumae and Diophanes of Mytilene. But she doesn't just hire them for her sons. She studies Latin and Greek alongside them.
Wow, so she's getting the education too.
Exactly. She famously referred to her sons as, quote, my jewels. She was cultivating them for political greatness right from childhood.
Her status was so astronomically high that King Ptolemy VIII of Egypt literally proposes marriage to her.
Right.
He offers to make her the queen of Egypt, and Cordelia turns him down.
It's amazing.
She basically says, no thanks, I'm perfectly fine managing my family's affairs right here in Rome. which tells you everything you need to know about the staggering power of a Roman matriarch.
Absolutely.
She possessed more hard, practical power operating from her dining room in Rome than she would have sitting on a throne in Alexandria.
It's wild to think about.
But what is truly crucial about Cornelia is that she wasn't just blindly enabling her son's radical ambitions. We actually have a surviving excerpt of a letter she wrote to her younger son, Gaius, after his older brother Tiberius was murdered.
Yeah, that letter is stunning because it proves she isn't just a grieving mother or a cheerleader for her sons. She's a geopolitical strategist.
She sees the big picture.
She is looking at the board 5 moves ahead. In the letter, she explicitly advises Gaius against seeking violent vengeance against the conservative senators who killed his brother.
Really?
Yeah. She warns him that pursuing vengeance will ultimately destroy the republic they're trying to save.
She read something to the effect of, vengeance is a beautiful thing, but not if it destroys our country in the process.
Right.
It's incredible foresight. She saw the cycle of violence starting and tried to use her maternal authority to stop it.
She represents a completely new paradigm of female power in Rome. I mean, she couldn't hold political office, she couldn't vote, but her political capital and influence were massive.
And the Roman public recognized it, didn't they?
They absolutely did. After she died, the state erected a bronze statue in her honor. It was the very first secular statue of a woman ever erected in Rome.
Wow. First ever.
First ever. The plaque simply read, Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi.
Though, fascinatingly, our sources note that decades later, conservative elites actually tried to alter the legacy of that statue.
Right, they really tried to erase the messy parts.
They attempted to file away or obscure the reference to her populous sons, trying to rebrand her simply as the dutiful daughter of Scipio Africanus.
Which is just so petty.
It is. They couldn't erase her massive historical footprint, so they tried to edit her legacy to fit their conservative narrative.
But they couldn't undo the damage her sons' deaths had caused. The Gracchi brothers are dead, but the underlying systemic issues, the massive inequality, the thousands of landless citizens, the broken political norms, they are all still festering.
It's bubbling under the surface.
Exactly. 40 years go by, and then a military general takes that dark lesson about political violence that the Senate taught in 133 BCE, and he scales it up.
Oh boy.
He applies it to the entire military apparatus, which brings us out of the Senate House and onto the battlefield into an era defined by warlords, death lists, and another extraordinary mother's intervention.
Okay, so the timeline moves forward to 107 BCE. The Republic is bogged down in this deeply frustrating, mismanaged war in North Africa against King Jugurtha.
Right.
The Roman public is furious at the incompetence of the aristocratic generals, so they elect a man named Gaius Marius as consul. Now, Marius is what the Romans called a novus homo, a new man.
Which meant he had no senators in his family tree.
Right. He is not from the old patrician elite. He's from a relatively obscure provincial town outside of Rome. But he is a brilliant military mind. Marius realizes he desperately needs more troops to win this war, but he is constrained by the exact same rule Tiberius Gracchus had tried to fix decades earlier.
The property requirement?
Exactly. The law stating that only men who own property can serve in the legions. So rather than try to pass a complicated land reform bill through a hostile Senate, Marius just blows up the military rulebook entirely.
It really does.
He institutes sweeping, fundamental military reforms. He abolishes the property requirement outright. For the first time in Roman history, he allows the capite census, the head count, the landless, destitute urban poor to join the army.
Right.
And here is the massive world-changing mechanical shift. The state will now provide their weapons and armor, and they will receive a steady paycheck for their service.
The logistics of this are really fascinating. He reorganizes the military structure into the cohortal legion. He standardizes their equipment. He forces the soldiers to carry their own gear and rations.
The Marian mules.
Exactly. They become famously known as Marian mules, which makes the army incredibly fast and self-sufficient. He basically turns the Roman military from a seasonal, part-time duty for farmers into a full-time, highly trained professional career.
Wow.
It was a spectacular military innovation. Marius defeats Jugurtha. He later saves Rome from a massive invasion of Germanic tribes. He becomes a national savior, and he gets elected consul an unprecedented 7 times.
Okay, so from a military standpoint, it's genius. But from a political standpoint, the side effects are absolutely catastrophic.
Completely catastrophic.
Think about the terrifying implication of this mechanical shift. Before Marius, A citizen farmer fought for the Republic, and when the war was over, he went back to his family farm. He had a stake in the civilian infrastructure.
Right. He had a home to go to.
But now, you have tens of thousands of heavily armed, highly trained professional killers who own no land and have no civilian livelihood.
Yeah.
Their entire financial survival, their paychecks, and the promise of a plot of land when they retire relies entirely on their general.
Precisely. The loyalty of the Roman soldier fundamentally shifts. They are no longer loyal to the abstract concept of the Republic or the flag or the Senate.
Right.
They are fiercely, personally loyal to the charismatic warlord who is writing their paychecks and securing their retirement packages.
It's the ancient equivalent of a superpower abandoning its national military and relying entirely on massive private military contractors who only answer to their billionaire CEO.
That is a perfect analogy.
If the CEO tells them to attack the Capitol, they're going to do it because the Capitol isn't paying their salaries. The CEO is.
Exactly.
And it didn't take long for that exact nightmare scenario to unfold. Enter Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
Sulla, yes.
Sulla is an optimate, a deeply conservative patrician who actually started his military career serving as a junior officer under Marius. But over the years, they become incredibly bitter political rivals.
The rivalry erupts in 88 BCE. Sulla, now a consul himself, is given command of a highly lucrative, prestigious war in the east against King Mithridates. But Marius, who is now an old man but still fiercely ambitious, uses his backroom political influence to get a tribune to legally strip the command from Sulla and reassign it to himself.
Oh, wow. And this is where the new military mechanics bear their dark fruit, right?
Yes.
Sulla doesn't just file a legal complaint. He leaves Rome, goes to his legions camped in southern Italy, his private professional army, and he tells them that if Marius takes this command, Marius will take his own veterans to the east, and they will get all the loot.
Right, he hits them right in the wallet.
Exactly. Sulla's men are outraged. So Sulla does the unthinkable. He turns his legions around, and he marches on Rome itself.
It's unprecedented.
This is the first time in history a Roman general leads a Roman army to conquer his own city. He drives Marius out, reclaims his command by force, and leaves for the east. But the precedent is set.
And it gets worse. While Sulla is in the east fighting, Marius returns to Rome with his own army, slaughters his political enemies, and dies of natural causes shortly after.
Just chaos.
Total chaos. When Sulla finally returns to Italy in 83 BCE, he fights a brutal civil war against Marius's remaining supporters, marches on Rome again, declares himself dictator, and institutes a bureaucratic nightmare that would scar the Roman psyche forever.
The prescriptions.
The prescriptions.
We have to dive into the mechanics of these prescriptions because it's not just a chaotic massacre. It's an incredibly organized economic system of murder.
Yes, it is.
Sulla literally posts lists of names on the whiteboards at the rostra in the Roman Forum. If your name was written on that list, you were legally declared an enemy of the state. Your citizenship was revoked.
Right.
And the terrifying mechanism was the bounty system. Anyone, a soldier, a random neighbor, even an enslaved person, could legally kill you on sight.
Just horrifying.
They could bring your severed head to the authorities and claim a portion of your estate as a reward. The state confiscated the rest to replenish the treasury and pay off Sulla's veterans.
It was the weaponization of greed to eliminate political opposition. It was a purge disguised as a legal proceeding. Sons turned on fathers, neighbors turned on neighbors, all to get a cut of their property. Sulla used these lists to exterminate anyone who had supported Marius or the populist cause. And one of the names that ends up written on those terrifying lists in the Forum is a very young, relatively unknown aristocrat, a teenager named Gaius Julius Caesar.
Caesar is targeted because his aunt happened to be married to Gaius Marius, and Caesar himself is married to a woman named Cornelia, whose father was a prominent Marian supporter.
Right, he's married into the wrong faction.
So Sulla demands that Caesar divorce his wife to prove his loyalty. But Caesar, remarkably, refuses. He defies the dictator.
Which is incredibly brave or foolish.
Probably a bit of both. As a result, his dowry is confiscated, his inheritance is stripped, and his name goes on the death list. Caesar goes into hiding in the Sabine hill country, constantly moving, suffering from malaria, his life literally hanging by a thread. He is completely cornered.
And this is where another extraordinary Roman matriarch steps out of the shadows to alter the course of history.
Yes.
We must introduce Aurelia Cotta, Caesar's mother.
Aurelia.
The sources describe her as an incredibly intelligent, deeply respected woman from a very prominent, well-connected consular family.
Okay.
Her husband had died suddenly when Caesar was a teenager, so she had been managing the family estate and meticulously overseeing his education. And when she realizes her teenage son is on the dictator's hit list, she doesn't panic. She goes to work utilizing the massive soft power available to elite Roman women.
She activates her entire social and political network. She gathers her brother, Aurelius Cotta, who is a highly influential figure. But her masterstroke is enlisting the Vestal Virgins.
Yes, the Vestals.
The Vestals are the most sacred, untouchable priestesses in Rome. They guard the eternal flame of the city. They hold the wills of the patrician elite. They are legally emancipated from male guardianship. Their moral authority is absolute.
Nobody touches a Vestal Virgin.
Exactly. Aurelia organizes this delegation of influential relatives and holy virgins, and she marches them directly into the presence of the blood-soaked dictator Sulla to petition for her son's life.
It is a phenomenal display of political leverage. I mean, Sulla is executing senators by the dozens, but even he cannot easily ignore a unified front of high-ranking patricians backed by the sacred authority of the Vestal Virgins.
It's amazing.
Aurelia essentially stares down the most dangerous man in the world, and Sulla finally relents. He pardons the young Caesar, but our sources note that as Sulla signed the pardon, he grumbled a prophetic warning to Aurelia and her family.
Oh, right. What did he say?
He told them to keep a close eye on the boy because he saw many a Marius in Caesar.
Wow. What's incredible to me is that Aurelia didn't just save a boy's life that day. She preserved the very future of the Roman Empire. And she remained a bedrock of stability and influence for him throughout his life.
She definitely did.
Years later, when Caesar is elected to the office of Pontifex Maximus and is married to his second wife, Pompeia, it is Aurelia who is actually running his massive household. She's the one who orchestrates the security during the sacred, women-only Bona Dea festival held at Caesar's house.
Yes, the Bona Dea scandal. A young, ambitious politician named Publius Clodius Pulcher decides to sneak into this strictly women-only religious rite dressed in drag, disguised as a female lute player, allegedly to have a scandalous affair with Caesar's wife.
Oh, wild.
But Aurelia is the one who catches him. She halts the sacred rites, covers the religious artifacts, and thoroughly searches the house until she uncovers Clodius. She then testifies against him at his highly public sacrilege trial. Aurelia wasn't just a background figure. She was the moral, functional, and political anchor of Caesar's early ascent.
She essentially gave Caesar his life twice, once at birth and once by staring down Sulla's executioners.
Absolutely.
And because he survives, Caesar grows up to look at the political landscape and realizes a fundamental truth. The traditional, legal path through the Senate is completely broken.
It's a dead end.
The Senate is corrupt, it's gridlocked by conservative obstructionists, and as Sulla proved, it's incredibly dangerous. Caesar realizes that if he wants to achieve massive systemic change and secure massive personal glory, he has to bypass the Senate entirely. Which brings us to the ultimate backroom deal, the creation of the first triumvirate and the young woman who served as the linchpin holding the entire Mediterranean world together.
By the time we reach 60 BCE, the Republic is technically functioning again, but it's a hollow shell. The Senate is hopelessly deadlocked. Caesar is a brilliant, fiercely ambitious up-and-comer, but he lacks the massive financial capital and the sheer military muscle to dominate the political scene on his own.
He's partners.
Right. He looks around and identifies the two men who hold those missing pieces. Marcus Licinius Crassus, who is unimaginably wealthy and looking for tax bailouts for his business allies, and Gnaeus Pompey the Great, the most famous, successful, and heavily armed general of the era.
And Pompey is furious because the Senate is refusing to give land to his retired veterans, right?
Exactly.
The Senate is blocking all three of them individually. So Caesar approaches them and proposes a secret alliance. The historian Cicero later calls it a three-headed monster. We call it the first triumvirate. I like to think of this not as a political party, but as a corporate board of directors executing a hostile takeover.
That's a great way to put it.
Caesar is the ambitious, charismatic CEO. Crassus provides the limitless venture capital. And Pompey is the intimidating head of private security. They agree to pool their resources, get Caesar elected consul, and then aggressively push through each other's legislative agendas, completely ignoring the Senate's protests.
It was a brutally effective political monopoly. But here's the critical vulnerability. These three men possessed massive, fragile egos.
Right.
They didn't genuinely like or trust each other. Crassus and Pompey, in particular, had a long-standing mutual hatred. To prevent this corporate board from splintering into a civil war, they needed an unbreakable bond.
Something to hold them together.
Exactly. They needed an alliance that went deeper than just political convenience. And in the socio-political mechanics of ancient Rome, the absolute strongest bond you could forge was marriage.
Okay, so Caesar has a daughter named Julia. She is his only legitimate child, and by all accounts in the sources, he absolutely doted on her. To cement this precarious alliance with his most dangerous partner, Caesar arranges for Julia to marry Pompey.
Right.
Now, looking at this purely on paper, it looks like a cold, calculating, deeply cynical political transaction. Pompey is roughly 30 years older than Julia. He is this grizzled, scarred warlord who has spent his life conquering the East. She is a highly educated, refined young aristocrat.
You expect it to be a miserable, loveless arrangement.
Totally.
But the historical sources reveal this completely surprising, almost Hollywood twist. It is one of the few genuine romances in the political history of the Republic.
Really?
Yeah. Against all odds, they fall deeply, passionately in love. The sources explicitly note that Pompey was utterly infatuated with his new young wife, and Julia completely reciprocated that affection.
That's actually really sweet.
Their bond was so intense, so publicly obvious, that rumors started swirling through the political classes in Rome that Pompey the Great, the conqueror of nations, was losing his military edge.
Oh, wow.
People whispered that he wanted to abandon politics, retire from his military commands entirely, and just stay home to live a quiet domestic life in the country with Julia.
Wow. She was apparently brilliant, beautiful, and wildly popular with the Roman public. And because their marriage was so strong, Caesar and Pompey's political alliance held incredibly firm.
It did.
Caesar feels totally secure leaving Rome to go conquer Gaul for a decade, knowing that his primary political partner in the capital is happily married to his beloved daughter. The hostile takeover is working perfectly.
Until it isn't.
Right. Then the unpredictable chaos of Roman street politics intervenes, and tragedy strikes in 55 BCE.
It starts with an event that was becoming all too common in the late Republic. Election violence. Right. There is an election for aediles happening in the Campus Martius. Political gangs like the infamous mobs run by Clodius and Milo are clashing. During the voting process, a massive riot breaks out.
Okay.
Pompey is caught in the middle of the crush. He isn't specifically targeted and he isn't seriously injured, but the violence is so severe that several people are killed right next to him and their blood splashes all over Pompey's toga.
Oh, man. Pompey realizes he can't walk through the city covered in blood, so he sends his enslaved attendants to take the blood-stained toga back to his house and fetch a clean one.
Which makes sense.
But this is where the geopolitical timeline hinges on a horrific misunderstanding. Julia, who is pregnant, is at home. She sees the attendants arrive carrying her husband's toga absolutely soaked in blood.
It's awful.
And she leaps to the most logical, terrifying conclusion in a city plagued by political assassination. She assumes Pompey has been murdered in the streets.
The psychological shock is devastating. She faints, and the trauma immediately throws her into premature labor. She suffers a tragic miscarriage, and the physical toll of that event fundamentally breaks her health. She never fully recovers.
That's so sad.
Less than a year later, in August of 54 BCE, she goes into labor again. She dies in childbirth, and the infant tragically dies just a few days later.
The biological tragedy of a young woman dying in childbirth instantly becomes a geopolitical catastrophe. Seneca writes that Caesar, who was shivering in a military camp in Britain at the time, was absolutely broken when he received the news.
He was devastated.
And Pompey was inconsolable. He wanted to bury her on his private estate, but the Roman public loved her so much they demanded she be buried in the Campus Martius as a hero of the state.
If we look closely at the mechanics of the triumvirate, the death of this one young woman completely shattered the political stability of the entire Mediterranean world.
It really did.
Without Julia, the familial bond between Caesar and Pompey evaporated overnight. They were no longer a father-in-law and a son-in-law bound by blood and affection. They reverted to being exactly what they were before. Two incredibly ambitious, heavily armed warlords eyeing each other with intense suspicion.
Right.
And just a year after Julia's death, Crassus, the venture capitalist of the board, gets himself and his legions annihilated fighting the Parthian Empire in the east.
The three-headed monster loses two of its heads in rapid succession. It's just Caesar and Pompey left. And the conservative Senate terrified of the massive wealth and military power Caesar's accumulating in Gaul, seize their opportunity.
They make a move.
They approach Pompey, stroke his ego, and form an alliance with him against Caesar. The Senate passes a decree ordering Caesar to lay down his military command, disband his legions, and return to Rome as a vulnerable private citizen.
And Caesar knows exactly what that means.
Exactly. If he returns without his army and without legal immunity, his conservative political enemies will drag him into the courts, prosecute him for the illegal laws he passed during his consulship, bankrupt him, and exile him.
So Caesar is faced with an impossible choice: submit to political destruction or commit treason.
Right.
In January of 49 BCE, he makes his choice. He leads his veteran legion across the Rubicon River, the legal boundary of Italy. He utters the famous phrase, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. And he plunges the Roman world into a devastating civil war.
It's a war that Caesar ultimately wins. He chases Pompey across the Mediterranean, completely outmaneuvers him at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, and Pompey flees to Egypt, where he is unceremoniously murdered by advisors to the young king Ptolemy XIII who were trying to suck up to Caesar.
Basically trying to win points with the new boss.
Exactly. So by 45 BCE, Caesar stands alone. He returns to Rome as the undisputed master of the Republic. He is eventually named dictator, perpetua dictator for life. But this absolute unchecked power creates massive psychological blind spots. Caesar equates his dominance with a mandate to disrespect the ancient institutions. And the source material points to 3 specific, unforced PR errors that turn the Senate from a room of defeated, grumbling politicians into active, coordinated murderers.
The 3 final straws.
Let's look at these 3 final straws.
The first major incident, the first straw, occurs near the Temple of Venus Genetrix. Caesar is funding the construction of a massive new architectural complex, the Forum of Caesar, using the spoils of his Gallic wars. A large delegation from the Senate, the most prestigious governing body in the Roman world, walks over to the temple to formally present Caesar with a list of massive new honors and titles they have voted for him.
Now, basic Roman etiquette and respect for dignitas dictated that a magistrate must stand to receive the Senate. But when this delegation of the highest-ranking men in Rome approaches him, Caesar just stays sitting down in his chair.
The ancient historians debate exactly why he didn't stand. Some suggest he was physically ill, perhaps suffering from a bout of diarrhea or vertigo.
Okay, possible.
Others claim that a close ally, Lucius Cornelius Balbus, physically restrained him, whispering that he shouldn't lower his dignity to stand for them. Or perhaps Caesar simply haughtily refused.
But in Rome, the reality didn't matter. The optics were everything.
Exactly. Optics are everything.
The optics were that he practically rejected their gift and treated the Senate of Rome like they were his subordinate clients or servants. It was a massive insult to their aristocratic pride.
Straw number 2 happens in January of 44 BCE, and it strikes right at the heart of Roman political phobias.
The kings.
Yes. Rome's founding myth is based on the violent expulsion of kings. They hate the concept of monarchy. But one morning, somebody places a royal diadem, a white ribbon symbolizing kingship in the Hellenistic world, on a statue of Caesar in the rostra.
Oops.
2 tribunes of the plebs, Marullus and Flavius, immediately ordered the diadem removed, acting as defenders of the Republic. A few weeks later, people in a crowd loudly call Caesar Rex, meaning king. Caesar responds with a witty pun saying, "I am not Rex, but Caesar," essentially playing it off.
Good PR response initially.
Right. But then Caesar makes a catastrophic political error. He is furious at the tribunes for making a public spectacle of removing the diadem.
Oh, he takes it personally.
He does. He formally accuses Marullus and Flavius of trying to stir up a conspiracy against him, and he uses his dictatorial power to strip them of their sacred office. He removes the tribunes of the plebs, the very magistrates who were supposed to be the untouchable representatives of the common people.
Oh, yeah.
By doing this, he alienated the urban poor, who had always been his strongest base of support. He looked exactly like a tyrant silencing the people's defenders.
And that leads directly to straw number 3, the most famous and theatrical blunder of all. The Lupercalia Festival in February of 44 BCE.
Yes.
It's a wild, ancient fertility festival. Mark Antony, who is Caesar's co-consul, is running through the streets mostly naked, whipping people with goatskin thongs as part of the ritual.
Just a normal Tuesday in Rome.
Right. Caesar is sitting on a golden chair on the rostra, watching the festivities. Mark Antony runs up to the platform, produces a royal diadem, and literally tries to place it on Caesar's head, shouting, "The people give this to you through me."
It was almost certainly a staged theatrical performance, a trial balloon, to test the public's reaction to the idea of Caesar becoming king.
And the reaction was a disaster.
Total disaster.
When Antony offered the crown, the massive crowd went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
The Roman people did not want a king. Recognizing the failure, Caesar dramatically refuses the crown. Antony tries a second time. Silence again.
Yikes.
Finally, Caesar pushes it away completely, declares Jupiter alone is king of the Romans, and orders the crown to be sent to the temple of Jupiter. And then the crowd erupts into massive cheers.
He salvaged the moment, but the damage in the minds of the elite was permanent. Every senator watching that performance thought, well, he was testing the waters. He totally wanted to keep it. If the crowd had cheered the first time, he would be wearing a crown right now. This flirting with monarchy was the absolute final straw. It pushed the conservative elite from passive resentment to active conspiracy. Which brings us to the conspiracy itself and its symbolic figurehead, Marcus Junius Brutus.
We really need to spend some time deconstructing Brutus because history, and especially Shakespeare, have painted him as this agonizing, noble philosopher.
The ultimate tragic patriot.
Right, the guy who loved Caesar as a friend, but loved the Republic more and struck him down purely to save democracy. But our historical source material completely shatters that romanticized myth. The real Marcus Junius Brutus was an incredibly complex, highly compromised figure.
He really was.
Oh man, my mind was completely blown reading about how Brutus actually made his money. Because while he is walking around Rome quoting Stoic and Platonic philosophy about the moral duty to overthrow tyrants, he is simultaneously operating as an absolutely ruthless, predatory loan shark in the provinces.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at the mechanics of this, because it exposes the hypocrisy of the optimates.
It's a staggering contradiction. To understand the optimates, you have to understand that when they talked about liberty and restoring the republic, they largely meant their exclusive freedom to rule the empire and enrich themselves without a dictator telling them what to do.
Right.
The Senate had a monopoly on provincial taxation and extortion, but Roman law strictly forbade senators from directly lending money to provincials. It was seen as corrupt. So to get around this, Brutus used proxy friendsmen named Cassius and Vatinius to hide his financial involvement.
The specific example in the sources takes place in the town of Salamis, on the island of Cyprus. The town is broke, struggling under heavy Roman taxation. They desperately ask for a loan. Brutus, hiding behind his proxies, fronts them the cash.
Okay.
But he doesn't charge the legal standard interest rate of 12%, which had been established by Cicero. Brutus charges them an utterly staggering 48% interest rate.
Which is just criminal.
It is a mafia-style payday loan designed to completely trap the town in debt.
And when the town inevitably couldn't pay this extortionate rate, Brutus's proxy, Cassius, used literal military force to collect. He convinced the previous governor to give him command of a Roman cavalry squadron.
Wow.
Cassius rode into Salamis, trapped the town councilors inside their own meeting hall, and besieged them until 5 of the councilors literally starved to death.
That's horrifying.
Cicero, who later took over as governor of the region, discovered this horrifying situation. He was appalled. He tried to restructure the debt to the legal 12%, but Brutus relentlessly pressured Cicero behind the scenes to enforce the lethal 48% contract.
So I have to completely push back on this romanticized view of these assassins as noble defenders of freedom. Brutus claims he's fighting for liberty, but he is simultaneously crushing vulnerable provincial towns, using state military force to collect illegal, usurious debts.
Right.
Is his version of liberty just code for the 1%'s right to extort the provinces without a powerful dictator like Caesar looking over their shoulder and policing their corruption?
It is a highly cynical interpretation, but historically it is a very accurate way to look at the socioeconomics of the late Republic. The elite entitlement was absolute. They viewed the provinces as their personal piggy banks.
Right.
But Brutus was also heavily constrained by his family's legacy. He leaned incredibly hard into his family's propaganda. He minted coins featuring the profile of his ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, the legendary figure who supposedly expelled the last king of Rome 500 years earlier.
Oh, interesting.
He paired this with images of the goddess Libertas. He was publicly boxing himself into a corner where intense peer pressure demanded he take action against Caesar.
The sources mention that people were leaving anonymous graffiti on the tribunal chair where Brutus sat as a praetor. They were writing things like, "You are asleep, Brutus, and you are not a true Brutus," actively shaming him for not living up to his ancestors' myth.
The peer pressure was immense.
And this combination of elite financial entitlement, philosophical justification, and intense peer pressure boils over. It draws over 60 senators into a massive conspiracy. Which brings us to the culmination of this century-long collapse, the anatomy of a murder.
March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March. The conspirators have carefully selected a Senate meeting as the venue for the assassination.
Why there?
The mechanics of this choice are crucial. Why do it in public? Because Caesar, in a display of supreme arrogance, had recently dismissed his personal contingent of Spanish bodyguards. He believed his person was sacrosanct.
Huge mistake.
Massive mistake. The only place he would be surrounded entirely by senators, without his loyal veteran soldiers or the mob nearby to protect him, was inside a Senate session. Furthermore, senators wore the voluminous toga, which provided the perfect concealment for a pugio, a military dagger.
The lead-up to that morning is terrifying. It reads exactly like a horror movie where the audience knows the killer's in the house, but the victim refuses to see the signs.
Yeah.
The omens in the sources are practically screaming at Caesar. You have the famous Etruscan seer, Spurina, who had examined the entrails of a sacrifice weeks earlier and found them defective. He explicitly warned Caesar that his life was in grave danger, and the danger would not pass until the Ides of March.
Right.
And then the night before the meeting, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, has a horrific prophetic nightmare.
She dreams that the decorative gable on their house and honor voted by the Senate collapses, and she finds herself holding her murdered husband in her arms, covered in his blood. The dream is so vivid and terrifying that she wakes up screaming in the early hours of the morning.
Just chilling.
Calpurnia begs Caesar not to attend the Senate that day. And Caesar, who was famously rational and usually scoffed at superstition, is actually shaken by her terror. He decides to stay home. He sends Mark Antony to formally dismiss the Senate session.
If he had just stayed home, the conspiracy might have unraveled. It's so hard to keep 60 men quiet. But the conspirators hear that Antony's coming to cancel the meeting. Panic sets in. They realize they might be discovered.
They have to act now.
So they deploy their most trusted weapon, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus. Not the famous Marcus Brutus, but Decimus. Decimus was one of Caesar's most trusted generals from the Gallic Wars. Caesar had recently died at his house. He had named him as a secondary heir in his will. Caesar trusted him implicitly.
He was inner circle.
Decimus goes to Caesar's house, and he uses incredible psychological manipulation. He plays directly on Caesar's massive ego.
Decimus essentially shames him. He says, "Are you really going to insult the Senate of Rome by telling them they have to wait to convene until your wife happens to have better dreams?
Ouch.
If you want to dismiss them, you must go down there and tell them yourself." It's a masterclass in manipulation. It works perfectly. Caesar agrees to leave his house.
And on his way through the streets, surrounded by crowds, he spots the seer Spurina. Caesar jokes, somewhat arrogantly, "Well, the Ides of March have come."
And Spurina replies with chilling calm, "Aye, Caesar, they have come, but they are not yet gone."
Let's set the physical scene, because it's vital. They are not meeting in the traditional Senate house, the Curia Hostilia, in the main Roman Forum, because it had burned down years earlier and was still being rebuilt.
Right.
Instead, they are meeting in a massive entertainment complex built by his old rival, the Theater of Pompey. Specifically, they are gathering in the Curia of Pompey, a large rectangular meeting hall attached to the theater's portico.
And our source material provides a modern study guide image of these ruins.
Yeah, if you go to Rome today, to the area Sacra di Largo, Argentina, you can look down into a sunken area and see these 4 massive weathered stone columns. There's stray cats sleeping all over them now, but that exact spot is where the bloodiest, most consequential moment in Roman politics went down.
As Caesar arrives at the portico, the mechanics of the plot snap into motion with military precision. Gaius Trebonius, another trusted former general of Caesar's, intercepts Mark Antony outside the doors of the Curia.
Smart move.
Antony is a burly, dangerous, fiercely loyal soldier. If he is in the room, the assassination fails. So Trebonius engages Antony in a long, distracting conversation about politics, physically detaining him outside the chamber.
Caesar walks into the hall alone and sits down on his golden gilded chair. The senators crowd around him, pressing in closely, which isn't unusual since they often presented petitions. A senator named Lucius Tillius Cimber steps up to the front and presents a petition to pardon his exiled brother.
Right.
Caesar waves him off, indicating that now is not the time for this business. But Cimber doesn't back down. He steps uncomfortably close, reaches out, and violently grabs Caesar by the shoulders, pulling the heavy folds of Caesar's toga down to expose his neck and restrict his arms.
Caesar is shocked by the physical audacity. He yells out, "Why, this is violence!" And that physical grab is the prearranged signal. Publius Servilius Casca, standing behind Caesar, draws his dagger and strikes the first blow, aiming for Caesar's exposed neck.
But he misses, right?
He does. Casca is incredibly nervous, his hand is shaking, and he only manages a shallow, glancing blow to the shoulder. Caesar turns, grabs Casca's arm, drives his stylus into it, and shouts, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" Casca, panicked, screams out for his brother in Greek, "Brother, help me!"
And then the tension breaks, and it's just absolute frenzied chaos. 60 men swarming him, drawing blades from under their togas. Cassius slashes Caesar across the face. Decimus stabs him in the thigh.
Yeah.
Caesar is a hardened military man. The sources say he fights back like a wild animal, twisting and throwing men off, trying to break through the circle. But he's blinded by his own blood. He slips on the polished marble floor, and he falls.
And he falls right at the base of a statue of, in a moment of supreme poetic irony, his old rival, Pompey the Great.
Wow.
The assassins swarm the fallen dictator, stabbing him 23 times. But here's where we get an incredibly fascinating medical detail from the sources.
Yes, the autopsy report. In the aftermath, a Roman physician named Antistius examined Caesar's body. It is history's first recorded post-mortem medical report.
And what did he find?
Antistius concluded that despite the frenzy, despite the 60 men and the 23 distinct stab wounds, only one of those wounds was actually fatal.
Just one.
It was the second blow, a deep thrust between the ribs into the chest cavity. The rest were superficial slashes. Caesar didn't die instantly. He bled to death slowly on the floor.
It speaks to the chaotic, almost amateurish panic of the attack. The assassins were practically stabbing each other in the crossfire. Brutus himself received a severe cut on his hand from a fellow conspirator's wild swing.
And then there is the intense historical debate over his final words. Because pop culture and Shakespeare have immortalized the phrase, et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus, but that Latin phrase is a Renaissance invention. It appears nowhere in the ancient texts.
The ancient historians Suetonius and Cassius Dio note that a rumor circulated that as Brutus approached with his dagger, Caesar said something in Greek, kai su, tenon, which translates roughly to, "you too, child." For centuries, people interpreted this as a sad, heartbroken question from a betrayed mentor. But modern linguistic scholars suggest it was actually a well-known, highly aggressive Greek curse formula. The implied end of the phrase is, "may the same happen to you." He wasn't crying. He was saying, "see you in hell, boy."
But the other possibility, the one reported by Plutarch, is perhaps the most chilling and believable of all. Plutarch says that Caesar fought like a demon against the others. But when he looked up and saw Marcus Brutus, a man he had pardoned, a man he had loved and promoted, draw a dagger against him, Caesar simply stopped fighting.
He realized it was over.
He pulled the folds of his bloody toga over his head to cover his face, preserving his dignity to the very end, and he died in absolute silence.
The deed is done. The assassins stand over the bleeding corpse, their togas stained with blood. Brutus steps forward, raising his dagger, ready to deliver a soaring philosophical speech to the Senate about the restoration of liberty.
But he looks out of the benches.
And the room is practically empty. The senators who weren't in on the plot are already sprinting for the exits in absolute terror, trampling each other to get out of the building. The assassins, confused but still riding the adrenaline, march out of the theater of Pompeii and into the streets, holding up their bloody daggers, shouting, "Liberty!" expecting the Roman mob to carry them on their shoulders as saviors.
But the mob doesn't cheer. The citizens of Rome take one look at the bloodied aristocrats, and they lock their doors. They shutter their shops.
They are terrified.
And angry. The urban poor loved Caesar. He had championed their causes and forgiven their debts. The assassins are met with this deafening, terrifying silence across the Capitol. They realize, with a sudden sickening dread, that they have completely disastrously miscalculated the public mood.
Total miscalculation.
They retreat to the highly defensible Capitoline Hill and barricade themselves inside to hide. They have killed a dictator, but they have no plan for what comes next. And down in the city, hiding in the wings, is the woman who has to clean up this apocalyptic mess. Which brings us to the mastermind mistress and the power vacuum.
We absolutely must highlight Servilia. She is one of the most remarkable, politically astute figures in the entirety of Roman history.
Tell us about her connections.
Her familial connections place her at the dead center of this crisis. She is Marcus Junius, Brutus's mother. She is the half-sister of Cato the Younger, who was Caesar's most bitter, uncompromising political enemy. And yet, for over 20 years, Servilia was Julius Caesar's longest-lasting, most famous, and most deeply trusted mistress.
I am utterly obsessed with evaluating her situation on the afternoon of the Ides of March. Let's just marvel at the sheer political tightrope she is walking.
It's insane.
Her son has just butchered her lover of 20 years, and we know Caesar truly loved her. The sources document that he gifted her a single black pearl necklace worth 6 million sesterces.
Which is, just an unfathomable amount of wealth, the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars today.
And instead of fleeing the city in a panic or breaking down in mourning, what does Servilia do? When the assassins realize they are trapped and hated by the mob, they sneak out of the city. And Servilia invites them, her son, and his co-conspirators into her private villa in the town of Antium to host a strategic summit.
Yes.
It is literally like hosting a geopolitical peace conference inside a lit powder keg.
It perfectly highlights the incredible undocumented hard power of Roman matriarchs. Women could not vote in the assemblies, they could not hold magistracies, they could not speak on the Senate floor, but they ran the empire from their dining rooms and their private salons.
She's pulling the strings.
Servilia was the ultimate political survivor and information broker. We have documentation of a specific meeting she hosted a few months later. The political winds are shifting. Mark Antony is in control of Rome, and he proposes a motion in the Senate to strip Brutus of his prestigious provincial command and reassign him to a deeply humiliating, low-level grain commission in Asia.
Brutus is furious. Cassius is panicking. And the great orator Cicero is at this meeting, wringing his hands, not knowing what to do.
Right.
And Servilia, sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by the most famous men in Rome, listens to them panic. Then she casually says, "Don't worry about the grain commission. I will have that proposal removed from the Senate's docket."
And she does.
She utilizes her vast network of backroom channels she calls in her favors, and Antony's official consular proposal just quietly disappears from the legislation. A woman who cannot legally set foot on the Senate floor completely overrides the sitting consul of Rome from her living room.
It is a breathtaking display of soft power becoming hard power. But despite Servilia's brilliant maneuvering, the historical tide is turning against the assassins. The republic they thought they saved is already dead.
Right.
And that final turn begins with the reading of Caesar's last will and testament. The Senate had agreed to a fragile amnesty. The assassins wouldn't be prosecuted, but all of Caesar's acts and his will would remain legally binding. So, a few days after the murder, a public funeral is held in the Forum.
And Mark Antony delivers a brilliant, highly incendiary eulogy.
A masterpiece of rhetoric.
He whips the crowd into an absolute frenzy by displaying Caesar's slashed, blood-soaked toga and reading out the massive financial gifts Caesar left to every common citizen of Rome. The mob riots. They build a makeshift funeral pyre in the center of the Forum. They burn Caesar's body, and then they grab the flaming brands and march off to burn down the houses of the assassins.
But the riots aren't the biggest shock of the day. It's the contents of Caesar's will that drops the ultimate political bombshell. Everyone in Rome, including Mark Antony himself, fully expects Antony Caesar's right-hand man, his co-consul, his best general, to be named as his primary heir.
But Caesar bypassed him.
He did.
Instead, the will reveals that Caesar posthumously adopts his obscure 18-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, and makes him the primary heir to his name and his massive fortune.
This teenager, Octavian, was studying military tactics in Apollonia, Greece, when he heard the news. His family wrote to him, begging him to refuse the inheritance and hide, warning him that Antony would kill him if he tried to claim it.
But Octavian accepts.
He accepts.
He sails to Italy, assumes the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and steps into the most dangerous political arena in human history. He inherits the staggering wealth, he inherits the magical loyalty of Caesar's veteran legions, but he also inherits a massive target on his back.
Massive target.
He has to survive the apocalyptic bloodbath that is about to follow. Which brings us to our final act, the second triumvirate, the imperial blueprint, and the death of the Republic.
Octavian arrives in Rome, and he proves to be an absolute political prodigy or a cold-blooded sociopath, depending entirely on how you look at the body count.
Probably both.
Yeah. He races a private army of Caesar's veterans, marches on Rome to demand the consulship at the age of 19, and realizes he cannot fight Mark Antony and the massive armies of the assassins at the same time.
Right, he needs allies.
So he makes a cynical, pragmatic choice. In 43 BCE, Octavian forms a legal dictatorial alliance with Mark Antony and another general named Lepidus. This is the second triumvirate.
Unlike the first one, which was a secret backroom deal, this one is codified into law. They are given absolute power to rebuild the state.
And the very first thing they do with that absolute power, they bring back the nightmare of Sulla, the prescriptions return, the death lists are posted in the forum once again.
It is a ruthless, calculated consolidation of power and wealth. They need massive amounts of money to pay their legions to fight Brutus and Cassius in the east. So they sit down in a tent and they barter the lives of their political enemies, their rivals, and even their own relatives.
It's so cool.
They put hundreds of senators and thousands of wealthy knights on the lists, confiscate their estates, and legally murder them.
The most famous victim of this terror is Cicero.
Yes, Cicero.
Antony hated Cicero for the speeches he gave against him. Octavian had been allied with Cicero, but he coldly trades his life to appease Antony. Cicero is hunted down, his head and his hands. The hands that wrote the speeches against Antony are severed and nailed to the rostra in the Roman Forum as a grim warning to anyone who would dare speak against the new regime.
It's just unmitigated brutality. With their war chests full of stolen wealth, Antony and Octavian march their legions east. They corner Brutus and Cassius at the massive Battle of Philippi in Greece in 42 BCE, and they completely crush them. Both of the lead assassins commit suicide.
The last organized military defenders of the Republic are wiped off the map.
Octavian returns to Rome, and to cement his power, he physically alters the landscape of the city. He builds the Temple of Divus Julius, the Temple of the Divine Julius Right, in the Roman Forum, exactly on the spot where the mob had cremated Caesar's body.
And the source material includes a modern architectural photo of these ruins.
Yeah, today it's just a semicircular mound of earth and some tough stone blocks under a protective metal roof where tourists still leave flowers. But back then, that temple was the ultimate political weapon. It cemented Caesar's official deification as a state god. And by extension, it officially made the young Octavian Divi Filius the son of the divine.
It was a masterclass in religious propaganda, but Octavian does not build this new imperial world alone. To fully understand how the Republic was permanently replaced by an empire, we must look at the women who engineered the social and political transition.
Right, the mothers of the empire.
First, we have his mother, Atia. She actively cultivated the mythological narrative of his divine destiny. She spread the story that she had fallen asleep in the temple of Apollo and had been visited by a divine serpent, strongly implying that Octavian was not merely Caesar's heir, but literally the biological son of a god.
I mean, that is the greatest PR mom in ancient history. But the true architect, the absolute genius behind the imperial image that sustained the empire, was Octavian's wife, Livia Drusilla. Octavian eventually defeats Antony in another civil war. He takes absolute control, and he takes the title Augustus. He and Livia are married for 51 years, and Livia possessed a terrifyingly brilliant political mind.
Augustus and Livia analyzed the failure of Julius Caesar. They realized that Caesar was murdered not just because he had absolute power, but because he flaunted it.
Exactly.
He looked like a king, he acted like a king, he sat on a golden chair. To survive, Augustus and Livia had to invent the greatest political illusion in human history.
They finalized the death of the Republic. They held absolute, unquestionable dictatorial power over the military and the treasury, but their genius was that they never admitted it.
Never.
They kept the Senate. They kept the elections for consuls and praetors. They kept the entire hollow facade of the Republic operating perfectly.
Yes. Their spatial and visual PR strategy is flawless. They don't build a massive golden palace that screams monarch. They live in a relatively modest traditional house on the Palatine Hill. Augustus refuses to wear purple silk. Instead, he wears simple homespun wool togas.
And Livia, the most powerful woman in the world, literally sits in the atrium of that house, visibly operating a loom, weaving his clothes herself.
Just weaving away.
She plays the part of the incredibly traditional, humble, morally upright Roman matron. They present themselves visually to the public as just ordinary Romans, who simply happen to be the first among equals.
Livia created the permanent, enduring blueprint for the First Lady. She was the model of propriety, deliberately masking her immense, decisive influence over state affairs. And we know how crucial her specific strategy was because when we look at other women in the Julio-Claudian dynasty who defied this modest image, they met horrific ends. Look at Augustus's own daughter, Julia the Elder. She rebelled against the strict moral laws her father passed, lived a scandalous public life, and was eventually banished to a barren island and starved to death by her own family.
Wow.
Or Agrippina the Elder, who proudly marched with the legions and quelled mutinies with a toddler in army boots. She was perceived as too masculine, too threatening, and was also exiled and starved. Or later, the Empress Messalina, who openly executed her political rivals and bizarrely went through a public marriage ceremony with another man while her husband the emperor was out of town. She was executed by the Praetorian Guard.
But Livia survived.
Yeah.
She survived, and she thrived for decades because she understood the fundamental rule of the new Roman order. True power doesn't need to wear a crown.
Walk softly and carry a massive, inviolable stick.
Exactly. She outlived Augustus. She successfully maneuvered her own son, Tiberius, onto the throne, ensuring the permanent succession of the empire, and she died peacefully of old age, eventually being deified as a goddess herself.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of all our sources, and the fundamental takeaway of this deep dive. The fall of the Roman Republic is not just a dramatic story of 23 stab wounds in the Curia of Pompeii.
Exactly. Let's summarize the journey we just took. The Republic didn't die on the Ides of March. It died a slow, agonizing, highly mechanical death over an entire century.
A very long century.
It started when the wealthiest men in Rome decided that hoarding public land was more important than the survival of their own citizens, and used the wooden legs of Senate benches to beat Tiberius Gracchus to death for trying to stop them.
Right?
It was fueled by massive, unchecked wealth inequality. It was accelerated by desperate, landless citizens who traded their loyalty to the state for a paycheck from warlords like Marius and Sulla.
And it was manipulated by a few fiercely ambitious elite families. Mothers like Cornelia and Servilia, generals like Pompey and Caesar, who stopped viewing the state as a shared republic and started treating it as their own personal property to be inherited or conquered. The institutions crumbled not because of a foreign invasion, but because the people in power decided that the rules, the norms, and the laws only applied to their political enemies. By the time Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, the Republic was already a hollow, rotting shell.
Right.
Augustus and Livia didn't destroy it. They just put a fresh, morally upright coat of paint on the ruins and called it an empire.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly uncomfortable but highly provocative thought. Something for you to ponder long after you finish listening to this deep dive into the sources. We have been taught for centuries to romanticize the fall of the Roman Republic as this tragic, monumental loss of a golden age of democracy.
Right, the noble republic.
But when you strip away the speeches and you actually look at the mechanics, the 48% extortion of the provinces, the constant mob violence in the streets, the private armies of warlords, the death lists, and the sheer concentration of wealth in the hands of 50 families, did the Roman Republic ever actually exist for the average citizen?
That is the million-dollar question.
Or was it always just a violent, exclusionary oligarchy of incredibly wealthy elites? Elites who, after a century of butchering each other for dominance, simply realized that a monarchy with a really good PR department was just a much more efficient, stable way to run their family business.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the ruins of those broken marble columns in the Forum. It wasn't the death of freedom, it was merely the reorganization of power.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it made you think twice about the heroes, the villains, the mechanisms of power, and the women who truly rule Rome from the shadows. Keep questioning the history you've been taught. Until next time.